Welcome to the Mission Ready podcast, where we focus on building high-performing teams. I'm your host, William Branham, retired Navy SEAL, sniper instructor, speaker, author, and whatever. I do some other stuff, business coach and consultant. I am joined with my co-host, Brenda Neckvatal, who is an HR professional. She is a team dynamic specialist, a crisis management expert, and a best-selling author. Brenda.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. And you can hear the director of security in the background. So
yeah, he's in charge. Yeah,
that's right. He's doing his job.
Safety first. Safety first.
I know, right?
On this episode, I wanted to talk about trust a little bit, and
talk about it a lot.
Yeah, we'll talk about it maybe a little more than a lot, but I'm reminded of this saying that the instructors in SEAL training would always say, especially on long runs in the soft sand, which is not easy to run in, and they would always say it's easier to keep up than it is to catch up. And in that dynamic, they were talking about on the run. It's much easier if you fall behind on the run. It's much harder to catch back up to the group than if you just put forth the effort to stay up with the group, stay with the team, stay with the instructors that were leading the run, rather than feeling sorry for yourself, becoming complacent and falling behind, and then, having to catch back up. It's much harder to catch up than it is to keep up. There's more effort that's required. And I was thinking about how that applies directly to trust. So I believe that it's really pretty easy to earn someone's trust in the beginning of a relationship. It doesn't matter if it's a personal or professional relationship. Very easy to earn that trust because there's a preconceived idea of this person. That we'll just speak in the corporate or business environment, or in the military environment, the team building environment. The leader has if you're in a leadership position, you already have established credibility because you were in that leadership position. Maybe you're the founder of the company, you're the CEO, you're the whatever. You have that trust already. It's already made, and it's your job to keep that trust till the end, whatever that end looks like. And then, but it's also easy to lose trust. Mm-hmm. And I can think about my own personal and professional life where I have had earned that trust very easily in personal and professional relationships. And then the things that made me lose that trust, or other people lose trust in me, were where I didn't stay true to that idea that they had of me. And the idea they had of me was the right idea, the person who I wanted to be. But a lot of times I became complacent or good enough or something like that. And that caused me to lose trust. So how do you keep trust? I think is very important, but then, we'll cover how do you get trust back if you've lost it. So how do you keep trust? You set expectations, you maintain those expectations, you communicate clearly and effectively, you keep your word, you listen to the people who are working for you or working with you. You listen to what they have to say and you respond appropriately. You just keep showing up. You're attentive. How I've lost trust is really, it wasn't malicious. I wasn't doing anything like that was hurting the team or the person or whatever. It was, I just became complacent. And I think this is, true in a lot of relationships. One or both partners become complacent. The same thing happens in the corporate environment. One or more leaders become complacent and they're not engaging with the team. They're not providing what they say. They're not sticking to their core values. They're not really going with what the mission says they need to do. They stop leading. And that was true for me in times where I'd lost trust professionally, as I stopped leading. I thought it was leading because I was in a leadership position, but I stopped leading and then I lost their trust. And it was very hard to earn that trust back once I lost it, especially in a very high performing environment like the SEAL teams. So I'll ask you, have you ever been in an environment where you have lost the trust of your leader? And the second question would be, has people ever lost trust in you? I know those are maybe some personal questions that you may not even be prepared for right now, but we're cool with it.
I have no issue. I have no issues talking about both of them. So take the first one. So have I ever been in a situation to where I've lost trust in a leader? And yeah, I have. And usually for me personally, like when I lose trust in a leader, that's when I mentally start making my exit. Because to me, once I lose trust in a leader, timeline, it starts to shrink. I don't really have much of the tolerance. And kind of along the lines that you were talking about, most people do trust each other when they first meet each other, but you also have a complement of people who also don't trust immediately. And there's a group of people that you have to earn that trust. And when you're faced with that, that can be kind of an unnerving thing. You know what I mean? It's like people, there's a lot, you kind of touched on, you hit a lot of really, really great points. And I'm kind of starting to say this, kind of go back a little bit to answer the first question. So when you're faced with how do you build trust with somebody, or how do you deal with trust in a manager that you've lost, it can usually start with a person's lack of integrity. And that's what happens with me. It's like if I start losing trust with something, it's always from the foundation of whether or not that person's integrity is in check. And when that happens, like we see it, like people see when somebody's integrity is out of check. Some people might call it lip service. Some people might see it as being kind of a two-faced thing, but no matter what, is that if your integrity is out of whack, people are going to see it, they're going to smell it, and they'll run with it. I had a manager who I wanted to throttle him, if you really want to know the truth. I was working as an operations manager at the time, and I was brought into this team. It was a Hail Mary job, which I was really, 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 really grateful for. But I went into a broken, low performing team store to help fix it, and then a year later I was transferred into the #1 team to help drive it. And that was always the plan for me coming in. It wasn't my plan, it was the plan that leadership had determined at the time. And so the second leader in the second store, in the high performing store, I didn't trust at all, mainly because he was an ass. He was a jerk, and he knows it, and he's admitted it. So it's not like I'm saying anything behind his back or anything, but he totally admitted it. He would just fire off and lobby rounds at me. He would growl and snark, and his lack of self-confidence is what drove that wedge between the two, because I was excited about getting into the #1 store in the region. To me, that's being back in a high performing team again. That to me is the cat's meow, right? Because I have an HR background, he had somewhere in his head that I was coming in to spy on him. And this can be further from the truth. And so that's a huge lesson. We lost you.
I'm here. I just had to step away for a second. I'm here.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Will's ass on the show.
You're welcome. You can
I'll pick up
witches, so it's cool. Nudity is appropriate, I think, in an HR environment.
And there's the kickoff for our second outtake reel. So, with this guy, I came in and he honestly believed that I was there to spy on him, which was just crazy. And so, it led me to really lean in on a lesson that I learned from a prior manager of mine, and that is, in the absence of information, people make stuff up. So trust is either something that is there immediately, or for some people they have to build it, and some people will never build it, and that comes from an individual's worldview. And the worldview is how how we grow up. It's the influences that we've seen, the experiences that we've had, and they shape our opinion of the world. And when you're talking about a group dynamics thing, very few people have exactly the same worldview. It's next to near impossible. And so we all come from different places. So that impacts trust. And then your second question, have I lost trust? Yeah, I have. There are times, and just like any other human being on the planet, where your confidence comes out from underneath your feet. Something's going on in your personal life, or you failed at work, you failed something at work, and now you feel like the whole world is starting to judge you. Some leaders actually do come down a little harder than others. And all of a sudden, you just feel that bedrock underneath your feet starting to go out. And as a leader, when you start losing your confidence in your ability, your confidence in who you are as a person, or you just may even slightly second guess yourself, even if it's just for a couple days or a week, you're at risk of losing the confidence of your team. The good news is that if you do wind up losing confidence, or if you lose trust amongst people, you can gain it back. But just know it's a long road to hoe. Absolutely. It takes a long time.
Long time.
Long time. And there's a lot of things that you can do to get there, and I'm sure we'll hit on that in a little bit.
Easier to keep up than it is to catch up.
There you go.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what about you? Like, have you in your past, because the SEAL teams are a pretty dynamic environment
Oh yeah.
in and of itself. And if anybody's been in and around the community as for an outsider like myself, I'm very fortunate to have exposure and into the SEAL community. I've seen things, I've heard things, never of them have ever been classified or anything like that. But I have seen leadership happen, and I've seen leadership not happen in the SEAL teams. But I can only imagine that you've had some pretty hot moments yourself.
Sure. And you mentioned something a minute ago, and about your leader being a bit of a butthole. And I was kind of curious about what your thoughts on that are, as far as leaders that are kind of more, what's the word I want to say? Gritty, abrasive leaders.
Yeah, he wasn't abrasive. He would break down and cry.
Oh, that's interesting. I was going a different direction,
Yeah.
because
Well, no,
I work with leaders that are, they are hard asses. They're
yeah.
hard asses, and you're like, dude, I can never make the guy happy or whatever. Like, what the hell? But it's only because they have such high standards, and they're holding everyone else to this incredibly high standard,
Yeah.
which really, at the end of the day, raises the performance of the team. However, we had to learn that. And we lost trust in the beginning, because we're like, he's just a jackass. Like, no one wants to listen to what he has to say. But once we finally figured out, or someone was like, no, dude, he's just like, it's just holding us to a higher standard.
Yeah.
And that higher standard will get us more work. It will get us more opportunity, all this other stuff. Oh, okay. Well, does he need to be like, that's just his personality.
Just who he's wired. Yeah.
Like, he's just holding this incredibly high standard. So we lost the trust very early, but we brought it back, because then we recognized, like, I understand where he's going, and how he did a poor job of communicating that. He did a poor job of saying, hey, I'm going to hold you to the highest standard possible, because that's how we're going to get the best work, the most amount of work. The things that we want to do will only happen if you have incredibly high standards.
Yeah.
Like, he led with that.
Yeah.
He could have led that with that every single day. Like, those core values that I talk about, like 3 to 5 things that you like, we have the highest standards at the end, rather than just being a jackass or an asshole or whatever language you want to use or not use. And which is not HR compliant, I don't think, but we'll roll with it anyway.
It's an HR neutral moment.
Right. HR neutral, earmuffs. Yeah. So I think it's easy to earn trust early, but it's easy to lose trust if you don't stick to your guns and you don't communicate clearly on what you're actually doing. So I went down that rabbit hole, but what was your question?
So much a question. So, there are people that I love what you're saying about somebody having a high expectation, but there's a lack of articulating it, right? So instead of like sharing with somebody from where they're coming from, and it can actually impact group dynamics really easily, right? So if you have somebody who is constantly saying, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing, this is doing, without the explanation of why, or why they're attaching the level of importance to something as a leader, exactly what you're talking about. Like, you had to take that step back. He, didn't necessarily have the respect or the trust for him right away, but once the realization came around that, hey, listen, this is just an individual with high standards. So take lesson. If you're that personality, if you, are that type of communicator, make sure that you articulate why you're saying what you're saying when you say it. And there's nothing wrong. It's not a weakness thing. It's not anything. It's a clarity thing. Because, it's funny because all the clients that I've had, I've had the privilege, the raw privilege of actually consulting to over 600 small businesses, which is massive. And every time I've had somebody with that personality trait start coming at me and start charging me, it's like, well, why the hell would we do this? And this is stupid. And I don't understand why this employee is doing this. And when you come back with them with a direct response, here's why, this is what's going on, boom, 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 you're actually meeting them where they are. But they don't know to tell you, this is where I need you to be, right? And it happens more often than not. And then people who don't see that, or they may not necessarily be used to working in that kind of environment, see it differently. So going back to my manager that I was telling you about, he would be like that, but then he would shift. Like, he had a personality quirk, and then all of a sudden he would, it was just a little bit of a drama queen, and he would start saying, well, I don't understand why we can't do this. And then he'd start breaking down and crying. And it's just, I'm like, dude, I'm the female between the two of us. Remember that? I know my alpha energy is like totally coming out right now. Will teases me about my masculine energy sometimes, but it was just like, at some point in time I had to put that hat on, and I just sit there and I'm like, can we get back to work, please? Because I don't know about you, but you've given me some deadlines. I need to get them done. Man up, man.
Right.
It's like, that's not good leadership. And if your employees see you acting like that, they're not going to care about you at all, or what you say.
Yeah. So in high performing teams, in the SEAL teams, your reputation is everything.
Mm-hmm.
If you lose trust, that's going to follow you around forever. And so for me, once I lost trust in guys that were working for me, or they lost trust in me, it was mission number one to re-earn that trust. And that came with, clear, concise communications, setting expectations, sticking to my word, having to do more work, more leadership, more proving that I'm in a leadership role. I had that trust, and then I lost it because I became complacent. I stopped leading. And guys and girls in high performing environments, they pick up on that very, very quickly. And they're like, oh, if you're not going to lead, we're going to lead, and we're going to leave you behind. And so that was a very difficult thing for me to happen. I know lots of guys in the SEAL teams who have lost the trust of their team, and they earned it back. It is not impossible. It is very difficult to do. It's best to just maintain that trust and maintain those expectations, and always try to raise those expectations.
And I think
raise expectations of yourself and what people think of you.
Yeah, and when you're trying to, like, if you feel like first off, if you feel like you've actually never thought about trust, there's a really great, Chinese proverb that's out there. And, that is like, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. And the second best time is to actually do it today, which gives you the opportunity to go ahead and skill up your ability to build trust. And a lot of people are like, well, how do you do that? Well, I would say one of the first things that you need to do is that you really need to examine your integrity, and you have to lead by your integrity, which means that you keep to your commitments. There's no lip service, right? You demonstrate extreme honesty, and extreme honesty is very different than being open. And, honest is, that extreme honesty is like, look, companies, SEAL leadership, we don't always get it right? We make mistakes, and there's nothing wrong with saying, listen, we examined this and we realized that is not the right direction to go in. Here's where we're going to realign, versus being too open, which is, oh my gosh, God, man, we had such a crappy morning this morning. I'm driving on the way in, I had a flat tire. My kid puked all over the dog in the back seat. I got a migraine headache, and I just found out that my husband's run off and had, an affair with somebody. That's like way too open. But a lot of people will use that to kind of try and justify not getting it right. And what happens is that people see through that. It's paper, absolutely paper thin. And it doesn't show the kind of intent that you want. You don't have straightforward motives at that. You're not looking for something that is based off of mutual benefit, because when you're doing that level of openness is that you're failing to care for the people that you actually interact with.
Yeah, you said something really important right there. You talked about, you make a mistake. And most people try to hide it or ignore it or make it go away or something like that. The most important thing when you're talking about trust is owning that mistake.
Yeah.
You screwed it up, own it. Let everybody know that you own it. Be completely
Yep.
transparent. It doesn't matter. I know your ego is in the way. My ego gets in the way. Everyone's ego gets in the way. Ego can be, I talk about there's two different egos. There's the ego that drives you to success, and there's the ego that will drive you to failure. And which one are you going to put on and wear around today? I try to put on the one that's going to drive me to success. And a lot of times that ego has to own what you've messed up, own the mistakes. And when you're in a leadership position, that's really hard to do. When you're in a subordinate position, that's really hard to do because maybe you've screwed up a bunch of times and you're out there and you're on the fence and maybe you're about to get fired if you screw up one more time. Well, you know what? Bad news doesn't get better with time. And so you got to own it immediately. I remember a commanding officer in the SEAL teams. He was like, nothing good happens after midnight. Bad news doesn't get better with time. If you're out there, something bad happens, you get in trouble, whatever, you have to own it immediately. Let us know so we can run damage control. We can fix it. Yes, there's going to be repercussions. That's okay. It's going to be worse if you don't come forward and say, hey, I screwed up. I had this, I had that, whatever happened. And let's try to fix it immediately. If, they find out through the grapevine, your organization finds out through the grapevine, or your subordinates find out through the grapevine that you screwed a major thing up and you don't own it, then trust is lost. The end. And it's almost impossible to get that trust back. So when you screw up, own it immediately, have complete transparency about what you're doing, how you're going to fix it, things like that. Empathy comes in when we talk about that. I did a little deep dive on empathy not that long ago, and I didn't really understand empathy really at all. And it's really about owning what you're doing. Here's how we're going to fix this or whatever. And then try to move forward from that. Maybe there's no moving forward, but at least you know where you are. And everyone knows that you're a person of your word. You stick by who you are, what you believe in. You have integrity, which we talked about. You talked about just a minute ago, and that's how you create and maintain and win back trust in any high performing organization.
I love the example. I love the fact that you brought empathy in. So it made me think of a time I had made a mistake, and it was kind of interesting. I had probably the most major skin in the game in this mistake that I had made, but I had a couple of other teammates that also had skin in the game for this particular incident, and it was a financial mistake. It wasn't anything like massive. It was easily recoverable. So not every mistake is a damned mistake or a damning mistake. There are mistakes that are recoverable and those that aren't. And this was a recoverable mistake. And I did not get empathy when I walked in, and I'm not the kind of person that is afraid to say I made this mistake, because the thing about leadership is that if you're going to hold people accountable, you have to hold yourself accountable too. And Will mentioned that just a little while ago. It's a two-way street. And whatever you do, never hold yourself more accountable than your team, because then they'll lose faith in you, right? They'll just see you as having no confidence, that you're always making a mistake and you're always like talking about your mistake. So don't go there. That's bad. But my old dive instructor, when I was actually training to be a dive master, and he said, there's a difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is when we go out under the water and your student is hanging over the side of the boat, puking up and feeding the fish. Empathy, and you sitting there next to them and holding over yourself over the boat, or puking out your lunch and feeding the fish right along. That's sympathy, right? Empathy is walking up to that student and handing them a bucket. And I always loved that analogy. It's handing them the bucket, right? So, in this case, I had made it was like a $1,900 mistake. And you're talking about a corporation of multi-millions, right? So 1,900 is a small mistake. It's a recoverable mistake. We could have written it off to loss, but nonetheless, I was able to actually get it back. But when I presented the information to my boss, what I got back in return absolutely tore trust down, because I think a lot of people, when they come to you and they say that they've made a mistake, they're coming to you very earnestly. There's a lot of fear and a lot of nerves, and it takes a lot of courage for most people to admit, especially in today's day and age, that they've made a mistake. And when you don't respond to it with empathy, and especially if it's a recoverable mistake, and you approach them and how I got approached, you're going to lose trust. And what happened with me is that I walked up and I told them, I said, here's what's going on. I didn't blame it on the other two people. I took full responsibility for it. I'm like, this is not that big of a deal. We can get this back. And you know, he said to me, he said, well, maybe you shouldn't get your raise this year.
Oh,
Yeah.
maybe I shouldn't. Can we talk about that? Can I just pay the money back and get my raise?
My raise was 7 times the amount that I would have lost.
Yeah.
And I'm like, time to look for a new job. Nobody talks to me that way. That's exactly what I did. I actually started the process of looking for a job. You never smack somebody like that when they're coming to you earnestly. And that's one way that if you want to lose trust, treat somebody.
Gone.
Yeah, done.
Gone.
Never came back. Never trusted that man again.
Yeah, that's a great example of what not to do.
Yeah. Don't treat your team like they're a bunch of 4-year-olds, even when they act like 4-year-olds, right? But when somebody comes to you with something, they're willing to take responsibility for, don't hit them when they're down.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's frowned upon for sure.
Yeah, that was.
I mean, you brought up that, and we just switched from trust to empathy, but they're intermingled.
No, totally.
You know, when you're as a parent, you have to your kids trust you. Your family can be a high performing team, should be a high performing team, and you use the same things that we talk about for business and leadership and the military and whatever with your family. They will be a high performing team. And when you're talking to your kids, you don't talk to them like that. You want them to be successful. When you're talking to your team members, you want them to be successful. And oftentimes empathy helps drive that. It's really the skill of learning. If you're in a leadership position, it's a skill of listening and hearing and being present and of like what happened, what's going on, try to understand things from their perspective, and then give them constructive feedback. The same thing you do to your kids. You can either whip their butts because they screwed up, and maybe that's the right thing to do at the time, and other times maybe it's not. Maybe the right thing to do is to listen and give them construction feedback. Maybe they still get their butt whooped because it was that critical of an offense, but it's setting the precedence of that's not acceptable. Trust me, this hurts me more than it hurts you. Physically, it hurts you more, but emotionally, it hurts me more, which was a very hard thing for me to understand. But the same thing in the workplace. Like sometimes you have to punish people because they screwed up. It doesn't mean don't give them their freaking salary or their raise that they've been earning the whole time. Punish the offense and then move forward.
Yeah.
Not a global punishment. I'm going to punish you for the rest of your life and you're whatever. That's absolutely poor leadership. You lose trust immediately when you do that. And that's not a way to build a high performing team.
It isn't. And for people who are trying to navigate their way through trust, there's something that happens anytime that we feel threatened. So let's say, for example, hypothetically, my mistake was not a recoverable mistake. Let's say, for example, it was a lot more than that, right? And sometimes when leaders are confronted, especially people who have not spent a lot of time developing themselves, developing their skill set, being around, mentors who are really capable of driving and leading teams. And all of a sudden something happens and we think like it's a big deal and it's this huge mistake that's about ready to happen. Or like the sky is falling, Chicken Little kind of a thing, right? We respond to threats in a very specific way. And so when somebody presents us an issue and we don't know how to manage through it, sometimes what happens is we start to take this narrow view of the world and our field of vision starts to become very restricted to what's immediately in front of us. That is a very normal and healthy evolutionary survival mechanism to stress and ambiguity. And leaders have to take that moment when they're feeling that to open up their aperture. And usually what happens is when you get a response like what I just shared, is that all of a sudden that vision comes in like this, like, holy crap, this is a big thing and we're not going to be able to recover from this. And it just leads to one thing over and over and over and over again, right? Blah, 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 whatever's going on in their head. When you take that, when you start to open up that aperture, you start taking a broad look at the challenges and the opportunity, and you have to do this. You have to get good at this and you have to learn how to do this quickly. It will help you refocus and foster stronger leadership. And it requires you to take a long view approach, knowing that whatever it is you're up against, you have to manage beyond the present. You have to lead beyond the present.
No, 100%. But that's leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Not
It is
focused
leadership
on the teeny tiny things,
yeah.
It's leadership is where most people fail in leadership, is they do get sucked into the nitty gritty rather than stepping back and looking at the big picture.
And
big picture consequences. They fall into their emotions. They start leading emotionally instead of logically.
Yeah.
And again, that's a failure. That's not sticking to your core values. That's not establishing trust. That's not leading from the front.
And that erodes trust. Yeah.
So very quickly.
Yeah, we have a mutual friend, his brother in arms, one of my best friends, Mike Day, passed away a year ago. Mike and I would sit around and we'd talk about this kind of stuff all the time. And Mike had, for many occasions, my old podcast show that I did, Mike actually came out and said that you can't lead without trust, period. You just can't. They go hand in hand. One hand washes the other. All the time.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we have beat trust to death. Break your episode.
No, let me ask you this one question.
Right, go for it.
I have one. I know I got one that we haven't asked. So let's talk about the optics when it comes to trust. Optics are a big deal. When people start looking at what's going on. So we know that, we talked about the mechanics of what happens when things break down, but how does somebody overcome the optics of what could look like a trusting environment or not a trusting environment? Because people make a lot of wrong moves when they suddenly realize that they're not looking good.
Can you ask the question a different way? I want to make sure I answer your question appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to let me so we talked about how people respond to threats, right?
To threat.
Right. So when they get something coming at them, all of a sudden they perceive it as a threat and then that aperture starts closing, right? So what are let me ask you this, what are some of the things that people can do, small steps forward, that when you're in a situation where it looks like people aren't trusting you, you can reverse those optics organically, earnestly, honestly? What are some of the most important things that we can do? So I'll give you for instance, like when you listen to diagnose, don't listen to win an argument, right? That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. What are some of those little things that people can do collectively that will make a bigger impact?
I think we'll come back to the thing that you just said later, but the listen to diagnose versus listen to fix it. I think the biggest thing you can do is over communicate what your expectations are, or what your expectations are. These are my expectations. These are the things that I'm doing. These are the things that we're going to do to move forward. And because don't leave any assumptions to be made.
Yeah.
Destroy every possible assumption that could possibly be out there up front. because if you don't, then people will make their own assumptions, and then it will continue to be a hostile environment. It'll be continue to not have trust, and you over communicate. You set those expectations, you follow up on those expectations, and you continue to do it over and over and over, and eventually trust will be earned, and everyone will have the they will know that you don't mess around. You do what you say, you mean what you say, and you execute in the way that you say you're going to do with that.
Yeah. One of the things that I admire about the SEAL teams more than anything is the fact that you guys, and I love this about you guys, is that you guys want people to come and tell you, listen, if I screwed up, I want to know that I screwed up. And there's a lot of people that are actually afraid in today's world. They're very passive about this, and they don't want to talk about, they don't want to go through that level of discomfort, actually talking about what may have happened.
That's the ego. And we all have it. Nobody wants to be told that they screwed up. No one wants to be told that they're wrong. No one likes failure. No one likes to fail. You know, I say I hate failing, but I love failure, because failure is feedback. Failure is how I learn. I've learned more through failure than doing it right. And as a leader, I've so many lessons learned through failure. Like, oh, that is not how you lead. Got it. Okay, this is how you lead. And you know, the way we train, before we go into combat, we train to failure like you go to the gym and sometimes you train to failure, like till your muscles fail you, and someone has to pull the bar off of you or whatever. We do the same thing in the SEAL teams. Like when we're training, we've trained to failure. Like we'll have scenarios that there is no right answer.
Right.
And really it's like, as someone who was running that training, we just want to see what the leadership or what the team dynamic is going to do with those no-win scenarios. And because there's just so many lessons you can learn through that failure. And when you learn how to fail and you learn how to accept the feedback that you get, like, here's why you failed, and these are the things that you should have done or could have done better. These are things you need to improve on. If you can take that feedback, with a grain of salt, but you take it and then you implement it into what you're doing the next time and the next time and the next time, that's the only way you get better, is really through failure or messing it up. I have never learned anything by doing it right. I have done lots of things right, perfectly, but I didn't learn. I didn't actually know what the hell I was doing. I accidentally won. I accidentally got it right.
Yep.
And it wasn't until I had some pretty massive failure, which I was like, how did I fail so freaking badly doing that? Because I did it right 2 times ago.
Yep.
I didn't actually know what I was doing. I just got lucky. And so I think failure is critical to success and establishing trust. Own that failure. Man, I love it. I love, like, I screwed up here, 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 and here, and here. How can I get better? And you can ask your team how to get better or what they think.
Yeah. And, and one of the biggest barometers that you can have, like if you've lost trust or you're coaching somebody that has lost trust, is that the next time you're faced with one of those no right answer, no win situations, and you do the best that you possibly can, you collectively get everybody involved, or you handle the situation on your own, however it is that you decide to do that. And then you have somebody that said, dude, that absolutely sucked, and I was so impressed how you handled it. Now you know that you're on the right path. That's your barometer right there. And if you don't know whether or not people are actually starting to trust you, then you can ask them, it's like, what more do I need to do in order to move this team forward and build trust?
But that's also a level of maturity in the team.
Yes. Yeah.
Like an immature team members aren't going to, they will look, and also immature leaders. Immature leaders aren't going to want to show weakness to their team. They're not going to want to show that they failed. They're not going to want to show anything. Like, if you fail, you own it. You say, I screwed up here, here, and here, and this is how we fix it. Yeah. Set those expectations, over communicate, check. A mature team who wants to be a high performing team will say, they'll give that feedback. Awesome. The leader doesn't lose credibility if they own it.
Yep.
They actually gain credibility. But again, that's the team dynamic. That's the maturity of the team. Are they a high performing team? Are they ready to make everyone better? Yep. You don't get better by just doing it right. You get better by failing learning, and then getting better.
Yeah.
Using that failure as a foundation for your success.
Yeah, you're either leading a high-performing team or a team of mean girls. It's one of the two.
Mean girls, exactly.
Seriously. And if you're leading a team of mean girls, don't ever ask them what you can do to improve because they really don't care.
They don't. They want you to fail. They actually want you to fail.
Yeah, they'll set you up for it. So
that's not the team you want to be a part of. So
no, and the trust isn't there. The trust will never be there. Give yourself a break. Start getting a new team in place. Do better.
All right. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did.
Awesome.
You're going to be above and beyond. That is so fantastic. All right. So I have some good news. Did you know that I had good news?
I had no idea.
Yeah, you did, you liar. All right. So we have a book coming out. We're pretty excited about it. It's called Mission Ready, Building High-Performing Teams from the Battlefield to the Boardroom. We are anticipating for a book drop in the early part of May. And we may have a few other surprises that come with the book too, which will be pretty great. You can follow us, and we actually ask that you do because that's when you can go ahead and get a lot of updates and also the really juicy good nuggets that we put out there. Will and I are both on Instagram, we're on TikTok, and we're on Facebook. You can try and search us by our names, or we've given you a couple of cheats on how to find us. You can find Will by hashtag 5SEALSecrets. And since nobody likes to spell my last name, you can find me at hashtag Dear Brenda. And the other thing too is that if you're in the process of really trying to understand how to take your team to the next level, or if you really don't know where to start, or you just need a little bit of help, we actually have something for you that you can take on our website at missionreadyleadership.com. And it's an assessment. It's a completely free assessment in which you're going to get a customized report based off of the answers that you put in that you can actually take and start moving your team forward and move that needle so that you can be mission ready. So it's pretty awesome.
Very cool. So I'm glad you know how those hashtag things work because I have no idea. Zero clue. But thank you guys for joining us on the Mission Ready podcast, where we're focused on building high-performing teams. And I want you guys to go out there, stay awesome, and be mission ready. Talk soon.